Hello everyone, welcome back to All Fly here, recapping Day 12 of the Men's World Championship happening in Herning, Denmark and Stockholm, Sweden. So we'll hop into it today, starting with the scores from today's game, starting with a 6-1 victory for Austria over Latvia. Now, this was a game coming in that it was, in fact, if Austria could win in regulation, you would see them make the quarterfinal for the first time in 31 years. And Austria does win 6-1, so they do make the quarterfinals for the first time in 31 years. But also, more importantly, this was a game that I think for both these teams was one to really test their mettle. And we saw that especially early in this one where, back and forth game, and we saw Austria kind of get up early. And then from there, we saw a little bit of desperation from Latvia. And what we've seen from Latvia at this tournament is when they go down, they start to find problems. They start to get themselves exposed. And we saw Austria pick that apart today. And 6-1 was really a byproduct of that Latvian team getting exposed and having to draw themselves out and having to play on the offensive side, which frankly is just out of their structure. And that's what we kind of saw today, with this Latvian team, is one that just couldn't quite find it back into their style. And, for Austria, a really well-played game. They took their opportunities where they could, and they really dominated. And for this Austrian team, heading into a tough quarterfinal matchup against arguably one of the best teams at this tournament in Switzerland, it's been quite the run for them, and I'd hate to see it stop there. But for Austria, I don't think you should count them out quite yet. For Latvia, unfortunately, this will spell the end for them at this tournament, as obviously the loss today will knock them out. But for Latvia, lots to hold your head high about after this tournament. It's been a really well-played tournament for them. Unfortunately, they just haven't quite got the results they were looking for. And in today's game, it was no different. So a 6-1 victory for Austria over Latvia in this one. A tough loss for Latvia, a big, huge win for this Austrian team as they now move on to the quarterfinals. Then to the second game of the day we go, and honestly now, I don't know anymore. And this Finnish team goes from playing arguably one of their best games against Canada to one of their not-so-great games. And yes, they win this game 2-1. Great. They win a game. And yes, that's always helpful. You would get the 3 points. Whoop-de-doo. You put a little pressure on Canada. Whoop-de-doo. Right? Great. Awesome. But for Finland, this isn't the game you want to be playing heading into a really tough quarterfinal matchup. And yeah, I'm trying to find the words for this game because, frankly, for Finland, this was a disappointing game for them. And yes, you play okay, and yes, you get the win, but it's about building momentum. And I didn't really like their game all that much today, especially against a weaker Slovakian team. I thought they could have played a little bit better. But credit to the Slovaks, nothing to really play for. They're already out, and they're not going to get relegated, so there's really nothing for them to play for. But they showed a lot of pride today, battling back and really making this a game. And I think, for the Slovakian team, they've had a very unfortunate tournament, but they are a team still at this tournament that should be considered a dangerous team. And as much as this year, you don't have your NHL players, which obviously hurts them, very well could have went either way. So for Slovakia in this one, just kind of following up short against the Finns for the Finns. Obviously not the best game you ever played, but still 3 points is 3 points. You put a little bit of pressure on Canada, which didn't end up mattering. Actually, now move to the third game of the day, where we will see Canada winning 5-3 over Sweden. Now, this was a game that I think in many ways was retribution for that game against Finland, where it was a wake-up call. And for Canada, they finally awoke to the bell. And I think, you come out, you play this way against the Swedes. That's exactly what you're looking for, especially early in this game. And I think, for this Canadian team, that's the kind of game you want to put forth heading into the quarterfinals, where you're going to have some tough matchups. And yes, you also secure the top spot, which we'll touch on in a sec, but, it goes beyond that. And I think that's a huge deal for Canada to have that momentum riding into the playoffs, because now it's must win. It's win or go home every game from here on out. So, for this Canadian team, gold is in sights. The race, the Run Cup race or gold or whatever you want to call it for gold is back on. Now it's just a matter of getting the job done. So for Canada, great game today. For Sweden, this was a game heading in that I thought they would have been a lot more competitive. And they battled. Credit to them, they battled against this tough Canadian team, especially at the end where they tried to claw their way back. Unfortunately, just a little bit too little, too late in this one. But for the Swedes, this is a tough game against the Canadians. It always is going to be. But I still think that they really showed themselves well. And you kind of look at what's to come, right, for this team. And I think you're looking at a tough game against the Czechs. And once again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think when you look at the Czechs, they're a tough out, and you are going to have to play your game for the full 60, which, you kind of look at the way this tournament's gone. It's been a hit or miss for the Swedish team. So you will get home ice again. We'll see what they can do, obviously, and we'll touch on this in just a second. But playoffs haven't been kind to Sweden in years past, so we'll see what happens in this one. But we'll now move over to the news, and we'll start here with Latvia, which is all down to one game. And we talk about it a lot at these kind of tournaments where it all comes down to the game that matters. Unfortunately for Latvia today, they couldn't find the game that matters, especially against an Austrian team that's slowly been climbing. And speaking of Austria, with 31 years, the last time they made the playoffs at this tournament, and you look back at that quarterfinal, it was a 10-0 loss, 10-0 to Finland. So hopefully there's only ways to go up after that performance. But, 31 years later, back at a IIHF Men's Worlds for a chance to play for a medal. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me to see Austria take it. They're a team at this tournament that has been scrappy, to say the least. If they can find some goals early, they'll be dangerous. But if they can't, don't be surprised if Switzerland win it. But we'll talk about that in a second. Slovakia with another rough tourney. And talked about it yesterday or the day before. This hasn't exactly been the best tournament for the Slovakian team. And coming in, they weren't expected to do much. I didn't expect them to do much, at least with, all their NHL talent gone. And I think we saw that through this tournament, where frankly, they were just kind of missing that one little goal-scoring touch that could have changed the game. And that was really the difference in my eyes in this one, and not only in this one, but also for the rest of this tournament. So for Slovakia, a rough tournament capped off with a hard loss today against the Finns. And for the Finns, I give up. I don't know what to say about this team anymore. They play their best game, and they play one of their worst games, and they come out, and then who knows what they'll bring against the U.S. Probably their best game and smoke them 10-1 like they did against Slovenia. Who knows? That's just the joy about this Finnish team. I don't know anymore. I give up with this team. Then to Canada we go with the top spot in Group A. They will secure that spot. They will play the 4th seed in Group B, which will be Denmark. And we'll talk about how Denmark got there in just a second. And then to Sweden with notorious, and we all know of Sweden's track record in these playoffs at all these events. It hasn't been a great ride. And I think for the Swedish team, this is their year on home ice to change those narratives. And we'll see if they can do it. They're going to have a real tough test on their road up, but it should be interesting. So that's what we have here for the news in Group A. We'll now move over to Group B, and we'll start here with Switzerland and Kazakhstan, and a game that I actually predicted the score of in our prediction video, but this was a game that I think in many ways was an interesting one. And you think to what was at stake in this game. For Kazakhstan, they needed a point. Just one singular point. If they could force to overtime or get a win, they would stay there, or they would get out of relegation. They lose today 4-1, which means they will be the team relegated. But this game was one that I think was interesting. And for this Switzerland team, they struggled to find that first goal. And once they found their first goal, they were fine. But they struggled mightily to get that first goal. And maybe it was a kick. I don't know. But this was the kind of game for this Kazakh team that they needed a point badly, and you could see that. You could see the way they were selling out to block shots. And unfortunately, just one bad bounce ended up costing them. And then the scales kind of got tilted from there. Couldn't hold on. And that was your end result, a 4-1 victory for the Swiss today over Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan will be relegated at this tournament. Switzerland will lock up the top spot in Group B. And the reason for that was this next game with a 5-2 victory for the USA over Czechia. This was a game that I would kind of highlight to be penalties as a key driver of this one. Not necessarily the goals, although that was part of it for this U.S. team, but sort of that momentum-shifting penalties that we saw in this game. And, the Czechs look good for a little bit, and then they take a penalty, and all the momentum would be lost. And they'd look good for a little bit, and then their momentum would be lost. And they score 2 goals, and then they take some penalties, and that momentum gets lost. And this is kind of the theme. And you look to who these teams are going to be playing next, right? With the Czechs are going to be playing Sweden. You give Sweden power plays, they're going to burn you. If you're the U.S., you make mistakes, kind of like what we saw today with the Czechs, it's going to burn you against the Finns. So for both these teams, it's a game that you kind of want to remember as you look into your next opponent, because they will play fairly similarly. And for Sweden and the U.S. are fairly similar composite teams. And I think you look at kind of the way these two teams are built, they are top heavy and they're going to score some goals. And, we haven't seen Sweden quite unlock it yet. Yes, they've scored a lot of goals at this tournament, but I think they're in for a real big game. And I think today's game against Canada kind of showed that they're ready and roaring to go to put some pucks in the back of the net. We'll see what happens in their game against the Czechs. And for the U.S., it's going to be an interesting game where they'll play another trap-style team. They already lost to the Swiss. They struggled against Germany. Should be interesting to see what goes on in that one. So that's, for the U.S., a big win today. They'll secure the second spot in Group B as well. For this Czech team, they will now place third, and we'll talk about the seedings in a couple minutes, but it was a disappointing day, I'd say, for the Czechs, going from first place to third place in a matter of a day. So now to the final game, and this was the game of the day in Group B. And I think when you look at it, Denmark on home ice, Germany, the team fighting for fourth spot, Denmark fighting for fourth spot, winner-take-all game, the games you always love to see, and this game did not disappoint. Going to a shootout, this was a back-and-forth game where we saw the momentums kind of shift back and forth, and we talked about it. If Denmark could keep the game close into the sort of the third period, then you would see Denmark probably have a pretty good chance in this game. And sure enough, they kept the game close, they got the tire, and then they forced overtime, and, Stützle nearly had the goal of the tournament for the Germans in overtime. Couldn't quite pull it off. They forced shootout, and what happens in shootout? As always, the weaker team wins. So Denmark picks up the big 2 points, I guess, in this one over Germany. And this was a game that I think Denmark's going to look at and say, you know what, we'll give our fans a shot. They're about to play a real tough Canadian team on home ice. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee because, frankly, what we've seen at this tournament is nothing's a guarantee. But at the very least, they guarantee their fans a shot at the quarterfinals and a chance to play for a medal. So we'll see what's to come in this Canada-Denmark game, but it should be interesting. A 2-1 victory in a shootout for Denmark over Germany. Denmark will go on to the quarters. Germany will be the fifth-place team in Group B, missing it by just a single point. And then to the news we will go now for Switzerland, with securing the top spot in Group B with their win over the Kazakhs and Czechia's regulation loss against the U.S. today. And then for Kazakhstan, on the alternate, you have them being relegated from this tournament, which is a tough thing to see, obviously, for this Kazakh team with the big win over Norway early in this tournament. But unfortunately, it's just that one loss, the game that matters. And unfortunately for this Kazakh team, they couldn't beat Hungary. So Kazakhstan will be the team relegated at this tournament. And then for the U.S., we'll go with will and away. And when you look at this U.S. team, they wanted it and they willed it. They willed their victory today. And I think if they can play like that the rest of this tournament, they got a shot to play for a medal. But where they'll start to see some problems is if they start to get too cute, make a lot of mistakes, take some bad penalties. That's where we'll see this U.S. team really struggle. But if they can play their game like they did today, look out, because it could be an interesting one. And then to the Czechs, we will go with Kenobi. Come on. Surely there's some Star Wars fans in here. For this Czech team, you go from the first spot in Group B to the third spot in Group B, all in the course of a day. And it is a disappointing result, I think, for the Czechs, where you go from playing a team like an Austria to having to play arguably one of the best teams at this tournament in Sweden. And we'll touch on the power rankings in a little bit because that was requested. But, for this Czech team, wow, what a fall. And I think they're going to look back on this game against the U.S. and say, if only we would have won that game, this could have been very different. So for the Czechs today, with no B1 Kenobi, they will not be the B1 team at this tournament. An unfortunate result for them, but at the same time, they got some work to do. And now it's a matter of eventually you're going to have to go through these teams. You're just going to have to go through them a little bit earlier. So for the Czechs, we'll see what they can do for the rest of this tournament. But it should be interesting. As for Denmark today with Nikolai Ehlers was back from the NHL playoffs, joined Denmark for this last game, and what more can you expect from him? Scoring the game, tying goal to force overtime. Can't really ask for much more than that. So for Denmark today, this was the game I think they needed to play. A tight checking game right to the very end, and they looked really good doing that. And then for Germany with ouch. And for this German team, it was a tough one. And I think when you look at it, they're going to look back and say, we probably should have been there. And you look at the games they lost, and they came back 3 goals against Germany or against the U.S., and they lost by 3 more goals. So I think, for this German team, there's games in this tournament where you kind of look and say, well, if only we would have taken that one, or, in overtime, if only we would have actually hit the puck in the net for Stützle, could have been a very different tournament, but it is an ouch for them today. An unfortunate result, but still, Denmark, the home country, gets their opportunity on home ice to cause a little bit of chaos. Once again, though, the playoffs will be in Sweden. It says semifinals and finals, but the next game for Denmark will be at home. So a little bit of home ice advantage before they go away. Should be interesting to see what they do with that. We'll now move to the final standings from this tournament. We'll start here with Canada in Group A with 19 points in first place. Sweden in second with 18. Finland in third with 16. Austria in fourth with 10. Latvia in fifth with 9. Slovakia in sixth with 7. Slovenia in seventh with 4 points. And France in last place with 1 point. They will be the team relegated from Group A. As for Group B, we'll start here in the top spot with Switzerland in first place with 19 points. USA in second with 17. Czechs in third with 17. Remember, the U.S. had the tiebreaker over the Czechs with their win today. Then Denmark in fourth place. They'll secure the quarterfinal spot with 11. Germany will be in fifth, missing the quarterfinals by just a point, as well as the tiebreak. If they won their game today, that would have been different. Germany now in fifth place with 10. Norway in sixth place with 4. Hungary in seventh with 3 points. And Kazakhstan with 3 points, the relegation team in eighth place in Group B, losing their game to Hungary, which ended up costing them these points. So, lots to kind of play for when you look at what kind of goes on here at these kind of tournaments. And it's one game that matters. And you look at some of the teams in this tournament and where they placed in the standings, one game could have shifted this entire thing. So as much as you can kind of say, well, this game and that game, every game does matter at this tournament. And teams start to realize that. And I think you see now with a team like, an Austria who's sneaking into the playoffs, not expected to do that, but sure enough, they get the points today and they find their way to sneak into the playoffs for the first time in 31 years. So, for this team, Austrian team, really well played game today. We'll see if that carries into the quarterfinals. But we will now go over to our playoff picture. And, of course, we'll see the quarterfinal matchups where we will see Switzerland taking on Austria. You'll see Sweden taking on Czechia, the USA playing Finland, and Canada playing Denmark. And, when we look at these matchups, the one thing I will say is it's going to be interesting. And Switzerland-Austria has my eye because I've been very down on the Swiss team this tournament, and I can appreciate that it hasn't been a great run for me with those predictions. But there's something about this Austrian team that's kind of caught my eye these last couple games. I don't know if it was their game against Sweden. I don't know if it was their game against Latvia today. But I think they have a decent shot at this game. And not favorites by any means, but I think they have a shot to beat the Swiss. That one's an interesting one to me. Then you probably have two of the best teams in the quarterfinals playing between Czechia and Sweden. They were my I believe they were both my 1 seeds for each of their respective groups in my prediction video. And we'll see those two teams facing off in the quarterfinals, which should always be a good game. Then to the USA and Finland. That game, I think I had a 3-2 shootout victory maybe for the US. Maybe it was 2-1 or overtime. I don't remember exactly what I picked for that. But that's another game where we'll see this Finnish team, try and withhold another offense. And the U.S. plays very similar to Canada, and Canada plays very similar to Sweden. The Finns played 2 very good games against Sweden and Canada. So we'll see if they can continue that success against some of the better teams at this tournament. And then the Canada game between them and Denmark, Canada at this tournament, I've been burned so many times by this team. I beg you not to make me sad again. But, this Danish team is one that's playing on home ice. They got some reinforcements with healers. Honestly, the way this international year has gone so far, it would not surprise me to see Denmark knock off Canada. I'm just going to say it there, but who knows? Should be interesting. That's what we have for the quarterfinal matchups. We'll now flip to the game times for tomorrow. So, or 2 days from now, won't be tomorrow, but maybe when the time you're watching this, it could be tomorrow. But on May 22nd, coming up at 10:20 a.m. Eastern time between the USA and Finland. This is probably going to be one of the games of the day. Two teams who play very different styles. The U.S. plays with a lot of offense, the Finnish team with a lot of defense. We'll see which team prevails. If you look sort of some key factors for this game, I'm curious to see how many players this Finnish team will sneak behind the American defense. We've seen that kind of become a tactic for this Finnish team. It's just to sneak players behind, get those breakaway chances. And I think if they can bury, 1-2 of those, could be a very interesting game because the Finns are going to limit a lot of the U.S. chances, play their trap style, and it's going to be interesting to see which Finnish team shows up. Not the greatest Finnish team that we've seen at this tournament in terms of skill, but a commitment to structure is one that always sort of throws a wrench, and especially against North American teams. And then for the U.S., player style, open the game up, try and get high-quality chances. That's going to be the trick for them. So game of the day coming up at 10:20 a.m. Eastern. That game will be in Sweden. And then the Denmark game, the game in Denmark at 10:20 a.m. will be between Austria and Switzerland. In this game, I'd expect Switzerland to win it, but honestly, the way this Austrian team has played, they're dangerous. And I'm very excited to see what Austrian team comes out to play, because if it's their best self and Switzerland takes a couple shifts off, don't be surprised to see Austria put a couple in the back of the net. Marco Kasper, once again, will need to be huge for this team, so keep an eye on him for Austria. And then we'll move to the third game of the day, back in Sweden as the home team. Swedes take on Czechia at 2:20 p.m. Eastern. This game is by far my game of the day. The U.S.-Finland game, it'll be a good one. But the game of the day between Sweden and Czechia, two of the best teams at this tournament facing off in a playoff round. It's going to be a good one. So stay tuned for that one. Both these teams are going to come out guns a-blazing. So it's going to be interesting to see which team takes it. Might come down to the first goal. Could come down to the last goal. And, that's just the joy of these kind of tournaments, is it really is never decided. So, for the Czechs, play your style. Get some offensive rushes. Allow the Swedes to make mistakes. As for Sweden, find your offense, find it early, and then stick to your defensive zones, your zone play. Create offensive rushes. That's going to be your key to success. So Sweden, Czechia, going to be a good game, 2:20 p.m. The other game at 2:20 is the host Denmark against Canada. And this game, I think, is going to be a very, very underrated game. And I don't think a lot of people are going to see coming. But I think Canada hopefully will dominate this game from start to finish. But if they can't find the net, and Dichow plays well for the Danes, could be a very interesting game. So those are your 4 quarterfinal matchups coming up on May 22nd. Should be a good one, so stay tuned for that. But before we do end it, normally we do end it after the schedule, we do have a special request today from Madeline Swan Y1B, who asks, can we see a power rankings? And why not? Let's do a power rankings, because we're at the end of the group stages, which means I'm going to get to take a shot again to redo my guesses, and you're going to see a lot similar. I'm sorry, it's not, the Swiss is first place, Canada in last place this time. But I do think that if you're asking me about my power rankings, I'm going to take the teams that I think personally have the best shot to win gold. So my power rankings are going to go as follows. Like Canada, I think the way we've seen them play at this tournament, yes, they have a tough loss to Finland, but it was just kind of the structure that they got bogged down in. I think if the Canadians play Finland again, they'll be okay. Then the second team was Sweden. Sweden has been a weird team at this tournament where they've played some really good games and some really bad games. I like the way we saw Sweden today against Canada. Yes, I don't think that it was their best game, but I do think that there's some room to improve, which is why I'm putting them in the second spot. Then the third team we go with the Czechs, and I think the Czechs are a team that, yes, they lose today to the U.S., but I think that they've shown some promise, and if they can play their style, they're always a tough out in the playoffs for these kind of tournaments. Then the fourth team in Switzerland, I don't need to say much more. The winners of Group B, the Swiss have become quite a team at this tournament. They've been red hot. We'll see if they can continue that. Obviously, they have an easier matchup against Austria in the group play, in the quarterfinals rather. We'll see if that helps them at all. And then the fifth team, we go with the USA, and I think the US are going to be not necessarily that blow it away team that we could have expected at the start of this tournament. I wasn't high on the U.S. I thought they'd be a good sort of top 4, top 5 teams, and I still do. As for Finland, I'm going to put them at 6 at this year's tournament. I think this Finnish team is just kind of a step behind. And as much as, yes, they'll play well against some of the more, structured teams, as far as what they've done at this tournament, I find them very hard to put them anything above a 6. Then to the 7th team with Denmark, I'm going to take the home crowd advantage here, at least for one more game against Canada. I just don't know. Denmark, Austria, in my eyes, were the two teams that kind of had to be at the bottom. If you ask me pure skill, I would take Austria, but I think, you include the fact that Denmark gets to play at home for one game. I think home crowd advantage is a really big thing, especially at these tournaments. So Denmark 7, Austria 8. Well, that's going to wrap up my power rankings. The final rankings, at least for the tournament, you'll see Germany in 9th, Latvia 10th, Slovakia 11th, Norway 12th, Slovenia 13th, Hungary in 14th, Kazakhstan in 15th, and France in 16th. The two bottom teams, Kazakhstan and France, will be sent back down to Division 1A. It will be replaced next year. So that's what we have here for today's video. Be sure to come back in 2 days for our quarterfinal recap, where we'll discuss not only the games that happened for the quarterfinals, but also preview the semifinals with potential for a gold medal matchup. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you like, consider subscribing. Tell all your friends down below their thoughts on Day 12 of the Men's World Championship. Until next time, see you.